I am joined now by our panel, Associate Professor in Political Science at Victoria University, Dr. Lara Greaves, Newsroom's National Affairs Editor, Sam Sachdeva, and current National Party member, Janet Wilson, who was also the Chief Press Secretary for Leader Judith Collins.
It's a long story.
All the good ones are, Janet.
Yeah, I know.
I want to start our panel today on the Foreign Minister. I felt like we learned a bit more this morning about where those AUKUS talks are up to. Janet?
It was a contrast and compare, really, wasn't it? When you look at what Andrew Little's been saying, which is quite gung-ho on Pillar 2, and then you heard what the Foreign Minister had to say this morning. It was a little bit, maybe not, we've got to work this out yet, you know. She talked about the non-militarisation in the Pacific, which I thought was a clear shot across the bows of maybe her colleagues. I don't know. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, there are some mixed messages there, right? And that's probably a matter of emphasis or focus. I mean, Andrew Little has taken on the defence portfolio, has been in the spy portfolios for a while now, so probably sees the sharper edge of foreign interference and some of those concerns, whereas, you know, Nanaia has to have a broader focus. MFAT, I think, very focused on keeping the trade relationship with China going and maybe not rocking the boat too much. But, yeah, it's hard to get a measure on what the government position is in the long term on whether or not we should be a part of AUKUS.
Yeah, and those are the tensions, aren't they? The trade versus foreign affairs, Lara.
Yeah, the word cloud from that interview was still the independent foreign policy and the emphasis there. And then secondary to that, though, was that still that buddying up more to the Pacific, and that's almost like a kind of neutrality tact in a way, isn't it? Like stepping away and being like, actually, the Pacific, and in a way, that's what I wondered to what extent that's symbolically there and a good way for us to try to take a step back and be independent, because, say, we've got that Tuakana-Taina relationship there.
Yeah, well, it feels like this independent foreign policy is going to be put really to the test sometime soon, because around us we have these sides lining up. The world's superpowers in our backyard. How long can we really keep up this sort of pretense, I suppose?
I think the ambiguity and the tightrope that the Minister has walked physically recently, having been in China and then been in Brussels with the NATO, probably exemplifies the whole situation that we're facing as a country in a foreign policy sense. And they're going to have to tack their flag to the mast at some stage. I
do think, though, that people tend to conflate independence and neutrality. We can have an independent foreign policy without sitting out of every international discussion saying, look, we don't want to be involved with anyone. It just means that when we make decisions, and if we join groupings, we do it in our own national interest.
I was interested when the Minister talked about not wanting a departure from the status quo with relation to Taiwan and China, and that I think she said she wants negotiations between China and Taiwan to continue, which seems a little unrealistic, given that President Xi's one of his great priorities is, as he says, the reunification of China. Is that a little, idealistic, I suppose, Lara?
Look, I'm personally not a big foreign policy expert or that up on the play in specifically Taiwan. But the one thing that I've been thinking about in relation to this is that we haven't seen much from the Chris's in this space, and I do see like Nanaia as Mahuta is holding more of that, like it's almost like more of a leadership role in terms of when we saw her in contrast to Jacinda Ardern. So it was really what I've been thinking about during that interview in all of that, is it's like we haven't seen necessarily Chris Hipkins being tested or Chris Luxon yet. So
Sam, what do you think about the China-Taiwan question and our sort of view on that?
Yeah, and there is a possibility that things could improve. I think they have upcoming presidential elections from memory, and there is the party currently in opposition has a slightly better relationship with Beijing, so there is a chance that things sort of stabilise a bit. But you're right, they have said, the CCP, Xi Jinping, in the long term, Taiwan must become part of China. It's a bottom line. I don't know that we're looking at a war or an invasion around the corner, as you hear in, Australia and some other parts. But in the long term, they're not going to drop this. It's not going to go away. So we're going to have to figure out how we deal with it.
I wanted to talk to you, Janet, about the last time a New Zealand Prime Minister visited China was Ardern's trip in 2019. That seems like so long ago now. A lot has happened in the world clearly since then. Things were a bit frosty back then. Does Hipkins need to get over there ASAP?
I would have thought so. There is a heck of a lot of trade at stake. We've put all our eggs, for whatever reason, in one basket. And part of that tightrope walk that I was talking about is trade. And I think Hipkins needs to make it a priority. I know it's an election year, he's got a coronation to go to, there's a NATO meeting that he's got to go to as well. But I would have thought that he needs to signal the importance of the relationship by having the Prime Minister there.
Yeah, what do you think the delay could be, Sam?
I think it partly is logistics. It sounds like the Chinese side have been a little bit backed up. They've only relatively recently reopened their borders. They had a big conference earlier this year, so I think they're kind of keeping a bit of space between that and international visits. And then it just gets difficult, right? We've got an election on October 14. As Janet says, Chris Hipkins is already going to London for the coronation, to Brussels for NATO. Does he really want to be spending that much time out of the country in an election year? So I think it's logistics on both sides that are making this kind of hard to get across the line.
But really important for us, Lara.
Yeah, important for him to start to look kind of presidential a bit in terms of Prime Minister, because of course we're always going to contrast him with Ardern. Like, we're just going to do that because she just was the Prime Minister, and now she's off to Harvard or whatever. So it's like he kind of has to embody that in a way, and that's another way to differentiate himself from Chris Luxon and to kind of look like he really is owning that Prime Ministerial role.
Exactly, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, we'll get to see him, eating his sausage rolls in Beijing.